My Gavanan and well met. I am Arachír Galudirithon, head of Divide and Conquer, the submod for 3rd Age Total War 3, and here today with the next faction overview video, this time with the Remnants of Angmar, who start in the far north of Middle-earth, just at the very tippity top of the Misty Mountains. Now the Remnants of Angmar were destroyed at the end of the, or in the middle of the Third Age, by a combined force of Gondor, Elves of Lindon, and the remnants of the Dunedain. However, they're a faction since vanilla, so we've built upon them and edited them in certain ways. They're one of the evil orc factions, so straight away you should be thinking hordes, 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 and you would be right. But first, let us talk about their campaign side of the battle, and not the battle side of the battle. Of the game, sorry. So, here we are. We begin in the north. Carndum is your capital. It's also a custom settlement, and a pretty nice one. It's very good fun fighting there. I'd always recommend that. You also then have Shadun at the base of Mount Graham, and Litash, the old dwarven castle just west of Gundabad. And these are your three starting regions. You start reasonably well. I mean, as you can see, I'm playing on very hard all the time, as I always suggest about testing, and you get about 2 grand a turn if you don't, before you've done anything. Unfortunately, the early game for Angmar is peppered with weak and pathetic units, so you have to brace yourself for that. But you've got a reasonably simple start, to be honest. Actually, you've got an ally here, the Misty Mountains, so you've got no issues over there, and you've got a few rebel provinces between you and your nearest ally. So it's a reasonably good start, but you haven't got very many settlements, so you do have to bear that in mind. Right, economy-wise, you're an orc faction, as I say. Economy is not your strong point, it's not your forte, but you do get as much economy as any normal faction, and as you'd expect. So you get things like farms, although they're called butcheries, and I can't remember what the line is called. Food production. You got hunting hut, hunting lodge, boar breeder, storehouse. That's the equivalent of your farm. The butchery, sorry, is where your spy comes from, actually, and that gives you a little bit of income. So you get your trade, you get your roads, you get your farms, you get everything that everyone gets, but you don't get any merchants guilds or anything like that. So economy-wise, Angmar's not too bad. The issue comes forth when you spread south from your lands and you take over the many villages between you and Eriador. And because they're villages, they don't have very much population, and population equals money, so they unfortunately will not give you very much money. So your 3 starting regions are your money makers. They're where you want to focus on economy here. You can already train a reasonable amount of units in these places, so you want to try and focus on economy. Apologise that it's reasonably stalling at the moment. My computer's only just turned on. You can already train a reasonable amount of units, so you want to go hard on economy for the moment. And then you can worry about getting extra units in the towns in between a little later on. In terms of expansion, as I've already said, you've got your ally to that east, so you can't really go anywhere, but there's a lot of rebel provinces between you and the Dunedain, especially up here in Forest Shell. There's quite a few rebel provinces here in the north of Arthedain, and there's a few little villages dotted between you and the Weather Hills, and then the heart of the Bree lands. So expansion's quite simple. You've got quite a lot of villages to take, but unfortunately you're going to be meeting 3 enemies expanding in your direction as well, which obviously brings you onto your neighbours. You've got the Northern Dunedain who start here on the eastern side of Bree, in Amun Sul and Fenestrianin, so they will push north and they will try and come at you through the path through Rudawa and the foothills of the Misty Mountains, the spur of the mountains there. The Bree land, if they can, often take a Numenas, Barketa, and then they come at you through this northern side, around the Dunedain. They come around the Dunedain, who often take Fornost and this barrier here. Bree is just here on a hill, next to the woods, and they often loop all the way around and come at you through there. But that's only, they don't tend to attack you, but if you try and attack that way, be warned that you'll have to fight the Bree land. But your biggest enemy, who won't bother you too much at the beginning, but they come at you after around about 40 odd turns, I believe, are the dwarves of Ered Luin. This is the mountain range of Ered Luin. This is where they start. Thorin's Hall's just there, and they will push east, because that's the only direction they can go, and they'll arrive at your borders reasonably quickly. However, it takes them a little while to push east, because they worry about their economy before they worry about troops. But once they do get going, they're a real juggernaut. So it's very advisable to be aggressive and ruthless at the start of the game as Angmar. You want to push out and take everything that you can, because you've got a lot of enemies to face. Your only ally are the orcs of the Misty Mountains. And of course Mordor, because you're evil, and almost all evil factions are allied to Mordor. But as you can see, you start at war with almost everybody near you. The Bree, Dunedain, Imladris, Lindon, the Dwarves of Erebor, and the Dwarves of Ered Luin are all your enemy at the start of the game. Everybody hates you. But the Misty Mountains will hold for a long time. Imladris will never leave Imladris, so you don't need to worry about them. It's just Bree, Dunedain, and Ered Luin who are your major threat. Now, unfortunately, Angmar are a faction that have no scripts. There are no unique little twists and turns in the Angmar campaign at all. Obviously, you are an evil faction, so you do have the ability to join crusades. Well, they're not called crusades, are they? Called invasions. Let's try and keep it to lore. You can join invasions, and you can also get the ring. If you do get the ring, excuse me, sorry. If you do get the ring, you can take it to Sauron, and he will come back, and he will rise again, and he'll fight for Mordor. It gives you a good boost to your standing with Mordor, but it doesn't really give you too many other advantages other than Mordor become very, 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 very strong when they get Sauron, almost invincible. So if you're worried that if you're worried that enemies in the south are doing too well and you need some pep, then you can rely on Mordor if you give them Sauron to attack. But otherwise, as I say, you don't have any scripts. You are a script-less faction. And right, so some advice to play as Angmar. It's reasonably straightforward. The advice of Angmar is attack, 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 attack. Your orcs, straight away with orcs, you know you've not got very good defense. You can't hold the line. You can try, but you will get overrun. It is only a matter of time before the Dwarves of Erebor, coming from here, with Erebor's just there, they will push west, and they will attack you eventually. And if they don't, Dale or Thranduil will attack you eventually, or even Anduin. Someone will get Gundabad who isn't the Misty Mountains, and they'll attack. Unless you support the Misty Mountains, but that's tricky because you've got to cross their lands to support them. So you've got to go on the offensive because you've got to get the power base ready for when you get swamped by around about an average of 5 enemies. You are likely to fight Erebor, Anduin, Northern Dunedain, Bree, and Ered Luin, all in your campaign. So you need to cripple one of them as early as possible. You get vast hordes of units. Your units are very, very cheap. Upkeep 86, 238. Your upkeep never really goes above 300 odd, which is very cheap for this type of game. So your faction is all about churning out as many units as possible. I mean, straight away you can see you can already get a full banner army of a horde of orcs at the beginning of the game, and High Chieftain Gorduff is a pretty good general. So you want to use him to spearhead. You also get the Guardians of Khand Dûm at turn 1. They're one of your best units. They're one of, in fact, they are one of the orcs, and by that I mean all orcs. They're one of the best units orcs can train in the whole game. Angmar are possibly the only orc faction that get an elite, that get real elite units. Obviously Isengard, I don't tend to count Isengard as an orc faction. They're a bit of a half and half. But amongst the rest of them, so Misty Mountains, Angmar, Dol Guldur, and Mordor, you're one of the few that get real elite and dependable units. So there's something to definitely get Khand Dûm Guardians out as fast as you can. In terms of construction, again, unfortunately you are an orc faction, so you get restricted construction. This means that you cannot build any castles. So if there are 3 tiers of a castle: Motte and Bailey, Wooden Castle, and Castle. And if you capture a Motte and Bailey, you're stuck with that Motte and Bailey for the rest of the game. I upgraded Litash to a castle because Angmar can't actually upgrade it. So at least you've got that as starts as a castle, and I believe that starts as a citadel. Oh, fortress. So you can't upgrade any castle, so you have to add that into your strategy, your tactical planning, in that you know you won't be able to get your best units in castles. In towns, you can upgrade towns all the way to where everyone else can. Oh, I think, no, you don't get the highest tier, so you only get 4 tiers of towns. So you do have restricted construction, which is another reason why your economy may suffer. In terms of guilds, you get the same guild that all orcs get, the Fighter's Pit, which just improves the experience of troops. So you get a Brawler's Pit and then a Brawler's Hall. And otherwise, that's all you get in terms of guilds, unfortunately. Sorry, do excuse me. So you do need to just be aware that you can't upgrade every building and every town. And that really all there is to the Angmar campaign at the start. I highly recommend that you separate your 3 armies into 3. Don't worry about your eastern border for now, and take as many towns as possible. If it looks like you're going to lose the town, destroy any buildings that you might have built, get the money back. churn that money again, like recycle that money into more units once again, train as many units as you can, and just keep flooding Eriador. Like, try and swamp them as fast as possible. The Dunedain outclass you, the dwarves outclass you, so the dwarves and the Dunedain really can take you 1-for-1 at the start of the game. It's really tricky. But the Breland don't. The Breland will struggle against you. So once you've taken down the defence, the Northern Dunedain, your Breland is easy pickings. And the Shire is perhaps the wealthiest region in the world. The 4 regions of the Shire can earn more money than some major cities. So that's really where your destination is, to get your money going so that you're ready for the Ered Luin attack and you're ready for the attack from the Anduin. So that's what I suggest. Swamp Eriador and claim as much as you can. But that's really all there is to the campaign side of it. Now we will exit and I'll load up a battle and we can talk about the units of Angmar. Angmar being an orc faction, as I've now said quite a few times. Angmar get hordes. You're all about weak hordes. You don't get very good units, but you get a lot of them. You get more men per battalion than almost any other faction. And you get a lot of choice at each tier level. Mostly, though, you get a lot of choice early game and not much choice late game. That tends to be indicative of orc campaigns. So here we are.
Units, await my command.
A brief a brief disclaimer again is we have added voices for the Men of Rhudaur. These will not be present if you are playing version 0.5. They will be present if you're playing 0.51, and you may recognise them from Hwaldar from the Battle of Middle-earth 2. Let's play some Rhudaur voices.
To me, hillmen! Come forth from the hills! Show the hillmen might!
So there's the unique Rhudaur voices.
Axes, drop!
They are cool, and they are nostalgia. The feels from those voices. Right, a quick look at your roster. You can see that you're not a cavalry faction. That is also true of almost all orc factions. You don't get cavalry. Your flanking and your heavy hitters are all infantry. Rhudaur scouts, who are one of your cavalry units, are so weak. So weak. A 10 defense, which isn't very good. An attack of 3, which is measly. Secondary attack of 6, which isn't too bad once they're in battle. But they've only got a charge of 6 as well. These guys drop like flies against the Northern Dunedain, so you have to be cautious with them. You do get wargs. Warg riders get a bonus against horses. It's not that they get a bonus against the horses. They actually scare the horses. So they make their enemy a bit worse against them. So essentially what that means is if you come up against a cavalry unit who are good against wargs, unfortunately they will be better than you, because whilst they are slightly diminished because their horses are afraid of your wargs, the riders are still very good against you. So in prolonged melee against a unit which is good against wargs, the fact that these scare horses won't help you. So your wargs are you use them to rout, you use them to chase down routing units, and you use them to flank, and you use them to break enemies, but you can't rely on them in battle. They're weak. They're so weak. Oft I have played against forces with wargs and absolutely laughed my head off when a whole battalion of wargs has fallen to one unit of my like militia or something. They're awful in battle, so do be cautious of that. The second thing to note about Angmar, as you can see from the lack of blue bars, is that we're not an archer faction. Snagga archers are abysmal. No armor, no defense skill, no shield. A strong breeze will probably knock them over. They are awful, absolutely awful. The point of them is to waste them on an enemy's strong unit while you maneuver your army to get something else. Or they're quite good at peppering other militia units or getting your enemy to charge you when you're meant to be attacking them. You can't rely on them to really claim any casualties. They're more of an annoyance than a threat. So thinking if you have like 20 of them in an army and you think you're all right, don't. They also have appalling morale, and I mean appalling. They've got poor morale, one of the lowest morales in the game. Very low accuracy, an awful range, only 16 missiles. They're just such a nothing unit. But they are so intrinsic and so important in your strategy that you need to have them. Because most of your units aren't very good, you need that fodder unit to hold the enemy while you focus on manoeuvring and bringing in your strong hitters such as Rhudaur Savages and Witch Realm Marauders. So right, let's start from the beginning and go through your militia units. Snagga, obviously, Orc Fellas, your early heavy hitters, Goblin Band, Snagga Archers, Goblin Trackers, and to some extent as well the Rhudaur Pikemen and Rhudaur Scouts. So we'll line them all up. Right, brief mention, Rudar Pikemen and Rudar Scouts will slide over there because they're only available in Rudar regions. That's sort of, you can see where Old Rudar is on a map. Certainly Camath Bryn and Dol Bryn. And then I think as well the mountain foothill provinces of Shadun and possibly Zag Kala. I can't remember if it's Zag Kala. No, it's Goblin Town. But anyway, there are 5 regions that you can train these. Sorry, do excuse me. But they are militia units, so they're only very good at the beginning. And they're also one of your only pike units. So you have to use them to counter the cavalry that Northern Dunedain will certainly throw at you. But with your militia, you start with these lot. Again, you get Snagger Stalkers. These are the non-archer equivalent of the Snagger Archers. And they are weak. They are very, very weak. The same description I gave to the archers you get to these. They do get a defense skill and they do get a shield. But again, they're fodder. You put them at the front of your army to soak up an enemy charge, or to tie up a unit while your better units flank it and get it in the back. Things like that. They break really easily. They've got appalling morale. And they have appalling stats, so don't rely on them. The next thing you get are the Orc Fellers. These are all available at the beginning. Orc Fellers are effective against armor, but otherwise they're awful. So they're very good at charging and attacking, but they're not very good in prolonged melee because, as you can see, they have appalling defense of 2. They are all about their charge and the fact that they're effective against armor, because that makes them that you can deal with some of Northern Dunedain's early heavy armored units quite well with the Fellers. And in fact, in my Northern Dunedain campaign, which I recently put up onto YouTube, some Orc Fellers took out one of my generals. I lost about 7 men, and one of them was my general because these guys are effective against armor. So you do want to use those.
Spears.
Right, your Goblin Band. These are where you start getting your. These are your first reasonably dependable units. They can do Shiltram, which means they can't be flanked, which can be useful, but it also can mean they can get attacked on all sides, so they do slowly die. They've got an average defense. These are your second tier militia, but they're only as good as other factions' first tier militia. So you're always a little bit worse at each stage than humans and certainly elves and dwarves. But what you've got in your favour, as you can see from the numbers, is you get lots of units per battalion. You get just a lot of orcs on the battlefield. And these are no different, starting with 228 men. They're good against mounts because they've got the spears, which is good. As Angmar, your units all get a bonus in the snow. So if you ever fight in the snow, all of your units are better. Unfortunately, that's the same of dwarves as well, so that's nullified against the dwarves. But the Northern Dunedain and the Breeland will not like fighting in the snow. So if you can, try and do your campaigns in winter to support your forces. You've got reasonably good stamina with the Goblin Band, which is rare for orcs, so that's a good little bonus. And they've got average morale, so this is where you start getting a unit that probably won't break immediately, but they will certainly break at some point. Awful charge, terrible on the charge, and a reasonably poor attack. They're just your first defensive unit and something to counter the cavalry. I've already talked about the Snagger Archers.
Swords.
I don't know why they say swords. I have to have a look at that. But these are your first dependable missile unit as well. With the Snaggers getting 1-1-1 across the board, these are the first ones who actually have a decent melee, decent missile, and a reasonable charge and defense. So the Goblin Trackers are the ones you want to really rely on when you actually come to the battle proper, because the Snagger Archers will let you down, and that is almost certainly going to happen, unfortunately. Right, so then you come to your next tier. This tier is available before the barracks event and in the first barracks, and that will be really only the Halberdiers, and the Marauders, I believe. I don't tend to play as Angmar very much. In fact, I've never played as Angmar. But this is certainly your next tier up. And then you get the Scourge Raiders who go in between, and then you get the Elites, with the Rudar units joining the Scourge Raiders, but obviously only being available in Rudar. I'll just line everyone up before we begin talking about them all. Group those. Oh, and your Trolls obviously are separate. We'll talk about the Trolls separately at the end. Bung those two over there. And you are part of that. Archers, that tier. Apologies for the moving everyone about. Already talked about the Trolls. Angmar bodyguards are your bodyguards, the Scourge Raiders in the middle. Right, so these are your tiers, with the ones over here being region restricted. So you get quite a lot of early militia, as you can see, and then you don't get very much in the later. But your next tier are the Marauders and Halberdiers. Halberdiers being effective against mounts, which is very good, and they're very good against mounts. I believe the game treats them as being pikemen, so they're very, very good against mounts. Again, reliable in snow, as I mentioned. The other thing that these have in their favour is they're good against armour. So not only can they deal with cavalry, but they can deal with heavy cavalry very well. So you want to get those guys out when the Dunedain start really throwing their best cavalry at you. They've got average morale again. A problem that pervades through the Orc factions is that overall you don't get very good morale. And so you have to really sorry, excuse me, terrible cough. You really have to try and be clever with your flanking and your charging, because if you let the enemy flank and charge you, they will really affect your morale, and you can often lose battles that you should win purely because you get a mass rout on your hands because the enemy's charged you in a weak point. As I said about the Orcs being good against snow, it does unfortunately mean that they get a negative bonus in desert. And they're also not too good in grassland, but the effect in grassland is only very, very small, but the malus in desert is very, very large. So do try not to fight in the deserts and try and keep them in the snow. In forests they're fine, and on grassland they're only slightly worse, but snow is where they really shine. So your Halberdiers are your medium tier anti-cavalry and anti-heavy armour. They've got poor defence because they're pike units, and the way pike units work, they need to be countered with defence. But their attack is very good, and being effective against armour means their attack is very, very good. For your mental calculations, do treat that as just being an attack of 10. The game doesn't do it like that, but that gives you a brief and a quick way of working out how effective they are. And then here's your main ship of the line unit, your heavy battle line unit, or medium tier battle line unit, the Marauders. Reliable in snow, they've got good stamina, which is good for orcs, a reasonable defense, and a solid attack and a reasonably good charge. Again, average morale, unfortunately. What's good about these guys is they start getting a good defense, and they've got a good attack. So whereas the Goblin Band do have a reasonably good defense at the militia tier, the Marauders can hold on a lot better because they've got a much higher attack. So they're a good flanking unit, or a good just holding the line, keeping the enemy in check, until you can get your elite units, these guys. Now, these guys are all after the barracks event, and the Scourge Raiders are available in just before you get these guys, so they bridge the gap a little bit. And they are where you're starting to get your first really good units. They're effective against armor again, which is a trait of Angmar, and a trait of most Orc factions actually, especially Isengard. They've got a good defense of 14, so you're starting to get a reasonably good defense. You're about up to the point where Gondor's mainline troops are. But their attack of 12 is insane, and an attack of 12 is incredible, especially when they're good against armor. These are essentially the assassins. You send these in to deal with a certain unit, knowing they will kill it. They might not do that well in prolonged melee, because whilst 14 is good for an Orc faction, it's not good for the game in general. So they might not last that long, but they will certainly take a lot of enemies with them before they go down, thanks to their high attack and effective against armor. These guys were knocked up by Hummingbird. I think they look pretty cool with their dual wielding axe and sword, and they vary which one is their main and which one is their second. So if you can get hold of them, you definitely want them to be the bulk of your army, because they're the first point where you can really counter the Dunedain. But then your major counter to the Dunedain comes in the form of the Witch Realm Pikemen and Marauders and Guardians of Kharndom. The Witch Realm Marauders are your heavy attack, the Pikemen are obviously Pikemen, and the Guardians of Kharndom are your battle line. When I say battle line, they're the ones that I mean that you have them at the front of your battle. Your enemy will push into them, but they can hold for quite some time. So they're the unit that keeps the enemy engaged, while your other units, such as the Marauders, move round to the sides to get their charge bonus in. Because as we will see as we go through the stats, the Guardian, they've got very good armor. All three of these have got very, very high armor for an Orc faction. I mean, obviously, the elites of Dol Amroth and Gondor, they are looking at 30 armor, and the Elves and Dwarves are looking at 33 plus armor. So for an Orc faction, it's good, but in the game, it's still reasonably average. They've got very good attacks across the board for their unit styles. So they can, that's why I call them battle line units. They inspire nearby troops, the Guardians of Kharndom. They inspire nearby troops. So they are, if you've got them on your battle, everyone is better. They can form shield wall, which allows them to deal with cavalry charges and makes them very good at attacking cities and towns. Reliable in snow as usual. And they've got excellent stamina, so they'll keep going for a long time in the battle. They've also got excellent and good morale response, so they're the first unit which is unlikely to break. They are very good in the battle. They can take charges and they're not going to break. They've got good morale, and they're the first ones that really have that. Next up are the Witch Realm Marauders. Now these guys are the attacking counterpart of this three-pronged attack at the top. They've got a high charge bonus, much higher than the Guardians of Kharn, 4 extra charge bonus. And they've got this, but they've got the same attack because they're effective against armor. Again, a trait which is often given to the Orc factions. They don't get very good armor, but they do know how to bring it down. These guys also frighten nearby enemy infantry. They're so fierce. So enemy infantry will have a shock to their morale once these guys charge in. And again, excellent stamina, so they can keep going for a long time. They only get very good morale with a good morale response, so they're not as good as the Guardians of Kharn at prolonged melee because their morale isn't as good, and they shine with their charge really. And once their charge is taken away, they aren't as good. But because the Guardians of Kharn have a minimal charge to begin with, what they start fighting at is how they will continue fighting at. Whereas these guys will take down a lot in their initial wave, but then the death toll will begin to slow down. Interesting point, they've got 22 defense, but 14 of that comes from armor. So if you come up against armor piercing units, they will massively destroy these. They'll be really effective against these guys because they are predominantly a high defense due to their armor. Alright, and then finally pikemen. Pikemen do exactly what they say on the tin, Ron Seal. They are pike units, but pike units with a high defense are nigh on invincible. They're obviously very good against mounts, that goes without saying. If cavalry charge these, the cavalry are dead, there's no two ways about it. But they're also very good against humans because they can keep them at bay with their pike line, and their high armor and defense stat means that they can take a lot of punishment. They've got a very good attack for a pike unit, so they're just incredible. These guys are really, really good. They're my personal favourite of the three at this higher tier. And you want to try and use them as much as you can. They are elites and they come from everywhere, so you don't have any restrictions. But the Guardians of Kharn only come from Kharn, so you have to use those sparingly because you can't retrain them. Again, excellent stamina, reliable in snow. Again, they've got very long spears, which gives them a bonus. But again, their morale isn't as good as the Guardians, so they're not going to last as long in prolonged melee. Your other elite units are your Rudauer units, and these guys come in where the Scourge Raiders come in. So they are elite units, but they're just the first tier. They're only available in the same 5 Rudar regions that the lower 2 are available in. And you get an aggressive Mun, a battle line unit, and an archer. The archers are useful because these are your best archers.
The hills will be ours.
They're the best archers that Angmar can train. It's still only got a missile attack of 5, so they're not as good as the starting archers that the Dunedain get, and you get these after the barracks event. So you're really not an archer faction. You've got to work out tricksy ways of bringing your enemy down. All about numbers. Your arrows are your orcs, whereas the Dunedain, their armies are their arrows, but your armies are your orcs. So you need to flood them and make sure they can't get their shots off. But you have got these guys if you need be. Against Bree, these will really shine. They've got a solid defense for an archer unit. Obviously you don't really want to get them into attack. Their melee's not wildly good, but their missile attack is good for an archer. They're reliable in woods, so whereas most of your units are good in the snow, these guys shine in wooded lands, and they're not that good in the desert, but they get a bonus in the forest and the snow. Unfortunately, the game doesn't generate reliable in woods, snow, desert, grassland or mountains. It only tells you if they're good in woods or snow. So you have to check down here to work out where they are completely good in. So these ones aren't good in desert. They get a bonus in forest and snow. So it's only in grassland and mountains that they're not bothered by fighting in grassland and mountains. They've got an average accuracy, which is not too shabby, but it's not very good for a post-barracks event unit. But a range of 170, which is good. That makes up for it. Now the Savages are a pure strike infantry. They've got a high attack and a high charge, but not a very good defense, as you can see. You really want to hit your enemy with these and then pull them out. Again, effective against armor, which is a real trait of the Angmar faction. You're really good against armor because, unfortunately, you've had years of fighting dwarves and Dunedain, who are all heavily armored. So you've learnt the ways of the armor, and you're good at bringing it down. They may charge without orders, which means they've got they're not very disciplined. No, sorry, it means that they're very disciplined, but they're so ready for battle that they wish they will attack. They could possibly charge without orders, which means if you line them up just like this and you set them on defense, which normally means the enemy will hold its ground, they might not. They might still just charge your enemy. So you have to keep your eye on them. But as I say, they're heavy hitters. They're real heavy hitters. You want to attack, but you don't want to leave them in there because they'll die by the 1,000. So you charge in, you let them get their effective against armor off, and then you run away. Alright, and that brings you to Ruadar's elitist unit and highest tier, which is the swordsman.
He will overthrow the West.
They get a solid defense, almost as good as the Guardians and the Witch Realm units, which is very, very good for for the lower tier elites. When you consider these are about the same as Scourge Raiders, who only have a 14 armor. So these ones are doing very well. And again, that is mostly from their defense skill and their shield. So if they're attacked by armor piercing, they won't have that much of a bonus. They'll only lose 4 defense. They've got a reasonable steady attack, and again a pretty poor charge, but slightly better than the Guardians because they don't have as much armor. They can shield wall, which is good for attacking cities, as I say, and like the rest of the Rudar, they're good in woods and snow. They've only got good morale, so they're not as good morale as the Orcs over there. So whilst they are a battle line unit, they're not going to last as long as the Guardians or the Pikemen, for example. But as Rudar, not as Rudar, I just like Rudar so much, but Angmar, we're Angmar. The trolls are where you shine. Obviously, well, most Orc factions get trolls. Trolls, I must say this again, I'll say it every time trolls are in the game, they're counted as infantry. That is a Medieval 2 limitation. We have to count them as infantry, we can't count them as cavalry. This means that pikemen and spearmen will have no benefit against these. Unfortunately, it will mean they'll be able to climb ladders. I'm sorry about that, it's been that way since Vanilla 3rd Age. There is no way around it. But you get 2 types. You get cave trolls and snow trolls. The cave trolls are just very, very strong because they get a very high armor. But as you can see, they get 4 hit points per troll. That means that is times by 4. You have to do over 100 damage to these guys to bring them down. Unfortunately, they don't get any shields, which is why the real damage against these guys are archers and javelin throwers, who can do a lot of damage against your trolls. So you have to keep them away from that. Also, siege equipment is renowned for being troll killers. So if you see any siege equipment, try and charge it and get rid of it. The trolls are just the ultimate shock unit. But they also happen to be good in prolonged melee. There's not much I can say about them other than they're amazing. They're really good. You definitely want to get them. Obviously, they cost a lot of money and their upkeep's high, so it takes a little bit of juggling. But you definitely want to get these. If you don't get these, you won't be able to counter the late game units of your enemies. And that's how almost all Orc factions work. You're all about the early game with swamping the enemy with militia, and then you get the best elite units because you get the trolls. But your enemy will prioritise the trolls, so they do often fall because the enemy swamps them to try and bring them down before they do too much damage. The cave trolls are reasonably good at 29, 35, 10. And the snow trolls are obviously a lot better. The snow trolls, frighten nearby enemy infantry, which the cave trolls don't do. They frighten. Oh no, I think they do. It's cut off for some reason. So they both frighten nearby enemy infantry. They can both charge without orders. Neither of them can hide, unfortunately. But they are also very good against mounts. They've been given the bonus against cavalry because they are about the height of the rider, so they can attack the rider without worrying about the horse doing any damage. The snow trolls are just more elite than the cave trolls, but that makes them rarer. You can only get them in a few regions in the far north. Obviously, their morale response is incredible. Their morale is very good. Their morale response is impetuous, which means that they have the best morale response possible. It basically means they're unaffected by shocks to the battlefield. They just won't run. They will never rout. I believe they also actually have locked morale. I'm not sure. No, they just have excellent morale. So they don't actually have locked morale, but the chance of them routing is nigh on impossible, to be honest. They'll die before they rout. So you want to get the snow trolls more, but they do cost more. As you can see straight away, their recruitment is doubled, but you get a much higher attack. You get 6 hit points with a higher defense. They are so strong. They really are strong. They also have been given a move speed addition, so these guys are quite fast. So if you can, you really want your snow trolls on the field. And your Angmar bodyguards are better than the Uruks of Mordor and the Uruks of Dol Guldur. A higher defense, better attack, better charge. They're very, very similar. They're essentially just Guardians of Kharndum, but as a bodyguard unit. So you get Guardians of Kharndum only available in Kharndum, but these guys are also available. Where are they? They're also available readily because you can adopt quite a lot of generals and whatnot. Right, so let's see some of these units in battle, just in a mock battle as I've done in each of these videos. We'll line up anyone who's a battle unit, which, as you can see, is almost your entire army. That is the amount of your army which are melee. It's insane, isn't it? They're your archers. We don't want them running away because they'll stop shooting. And then here's your shock division of trolls and cavalry. So let's start the battle. We're playing against the dwarves of Ered Luin. I just got a spattering of their units. You'll be able to see most of those in the Ered Luin video. But we will charge everyone.
Come forth from the hills to me, Hillman.
The Dunlendings will also have that Hillman voice that they have. Oh, our trolls have run into our own orcs, which is a bit annoying. Screaming as they go. The cavalry's going to hit first, but they're going to hit into Bronze Elder Guard. That's not going to go down too well. Those guys are good against cavalry. And these are actual cavalry. They've not really charged. They've done very, very little. The wargs have hit into Azagald's Tomb Protectors, a very strong attack, offensive and orientated unit of the dwarves of Ered Luin. The trolls are about to reach the first line of pikemen. Oh, and they've torn them apart. Oh, but they've thrown a load of arrows at us at the last second there from the orc hunters. Oh no, they were axemen. Trolls will be taking a pounding from those axes. Those trolls have hit in, but unfortunately almost all of our scouts have been killed by the Bronze Elder Guard. The main bulk of their units are now charging us. Hopefully we can hold the line. We want them on defense, which is the home button. I must write that down. In fact, I will do that right now. Defense is home. What's the skirmish button so that I can get it on the keyboard? Skirmish is now R. Must remember that. They're very slow, the dwarves, which works in our favour. The orcs are faster than the dwarves. Most of your units are faster than dwarves, but you are slower than humans and elves. So whilst the dwarves are slower than you, you're still not very fast yourselves, so you can't really laugh at them, unfortunately. The wargs have fled. The trolls are getting massacred by the armour-piercing nature of the Bronze Elder Guard. The snow trolls are doing incredibly well, because as I say, they are your best unit. I do have a terrible cough, I do apologise. We'll do our usual up and down of the line, see how everyone's doing. Charge those Ered Luin swords. There's our Scourge Raiders. Angmar bodyguards. Our unit of ours is routed. Guardians of Kharndum fighting hard against the swordsmen. Witch Realm Marauders holding the ground. The pikemen definitely going to do well against those forgers. Guardians of Belagost. They're a very strong unit, the Guardians. But they're up against our swordsmen, which is good. These are the guys who are meant to be doing charges, but unfortunately they're not. Our archers are peppering the dwarves, but we won't get many kills against the dwarves because they're heavily armoured and our archers aren't very good. But we do get a lot of archers, which works in our favour. Dwarven orc hunters, they're the axe throwers of the dwarves. The axe throwers of Ered Luin, who are somehow still throwing their axes even though they're engaged. The Bronze Elder Guard, some of the Dwarven Ered Luin's best units, who are massacring our orc fellas. And there's a standard warrior unit at the end there, fighting off our snagger. Our cave trolls have been all but defeated, along with the dead Ruadar units. Scouts, are they their archers? Snow trolls are down to only 2 men, but they've taken out a lot of units. Most of those pikes. Look at the dead dwarves on the ground. Dwarven travellers getting their arrows off. A couple of units of those. But anyway, that is the Angmar faction. So they're very good against armour, but they don't get very many elite units. But as orcs go, they do get very good elite units. You're all about early game swamping your enemy. You want to rush them with your large roster and early roster and your large unit battalions. You can't rely on your archers, you can't rely on your cavalry, but you can rely on your trolls. So advice overall with Angmar is to just rush. You're a rush faction and you're good against armour, so you can counter the strength of Dunedain and the Dwarves of Ered Luin. But that concludes the Angmar overview video. I don't know who will be next. I think I'll jump between the races so that we get a real snapshot. So I've been Arachír Galudirithon, head of Divide and Conquer. If you have any issues with DAC and you want to talk to us, you can post in the comments here, but do follow the link in the description to Total War Centre, where you will find most of our activity and where we cover any questions, and you'll find the FAQ there, the known bugs, any downloads, and any changelog information. So do head there if you have any questions or queries or just anything you want to talk about. But that for this one is the end. So Navar na den Pedimad, and farewell.